What piece of history is deliberately being erased from existence? The British government is currently trying to push a law that will pardon all members of the British military and police who committed murder, torture and other human rights violations in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. The Troubles, which started because the mostly Catholic Irish population were being discriminated against for basic things like access to social housing, voting rights. Only landowners could vote, who were mostly British, blatant gerrymandering, etc., protested peacefully, and wound up getting murdered by British Army paratroopers who were meant to be peacekeeping. Others have said Native American history, and that's certainly true, but I want to specify something important about this: their languages. Many tribes have selected tongues have only a handful of speakers left, and many of them are elderly, and before too long, after they pass, these languages will be dead. It is extremely unfortunate that there's little to no effort to try to retain these languages, keep them alive, and keep them going for future generations, but that's unlikely. Probably within a few short years many of these languages will be gone forever. All of it. History is written by the victors. He who controls the present, controls the past, etc., etc. What does and does not get discussed depends entirely on where you are and what you choose to, or are made to, consume. From a mainstream US perspective, A People's History of the United States, and Lies My Teacher Told Me, and others were eye-openers at the time, but I imagine plenty of people read those books and went, well, yes, of course. Read and learn as much as you can, from as many points of view as you can. If anyone is more knowledgeable about the topic than me, please inform me, but from what I've picked up through podcasts and documentaries, the British and Irish governments are desperately trying to forget collusion in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. There's heavy accusations of collaboration between MI5 RUC and loyalist paramilitaries and the Garda Irish Army and the Provisional IRA. But there's still a lot of people alive who would be compromised if all the information came out. Pretty much any political correspondence that occurs on the nightly news when either factions intentionally do not convey facts but rather push rhetoric and propaganda. You can find the type of characters in history books cleansing or purging of culture, religion or politics. Victors have the ability to change history by destroying or suppressing the past. The Library of Alexandria or the Vatican are examples of destroyed and suppressed priceless information. India destroys any non-Hindu remains it finds during excavations. Anything Muslim, Christian and heck, even dinosaur fossils are destroyed if found when developing land. There is a fear that reporting anything will slow the project and stir up communal violence. There was a BBC documentary on India a few years ago where the reporter finds some ruins and says it looks like a mosque but older than anything else. He comes back later and the whole area is leveled. For instance, there are probably dozens of others. The Herero and Namakwa genocide. Paraphrasing, a campaign of ethnic extermination and collective punishment which was waged in what is now Namibia by the German Empire. It was the first genocide to begin in the 20th century, occurring between 1904 and 1908. Between 24,000 and 100,000 Hereros and 10,000 Nama died in the genocide. Sweden tried to assimilate Sami people by outlawing their language in schools and outlawing yiking traditional chanting and drumming. Sami women were secretly sterilized by the Swedish government and that program lasted until the 1970s. BTW's secret sterilization without consent happened to Native American women at IHS hospitals in the United States through the 1970s, and in Australia to Aboriginal women as well. Considering the current political scenario in Brazil, certain criticisms of the dictatorship are not being talked in the classrooms. Anything can turn into a complaint from a parent or student on the extreme left, and there is a social movement aimed at harassing teachers, curiously called School Without a Party. They may even teach about torture, but they won't talk about the corruption of the time. For example, the secret police in communist Romania, the Securitate, who would arrest, beat and torture those who oppose the regime, and its numerous collaborators who stab their neighbors in the back for benefits. I feel like it's not talked about enough. Right now there are a lot of older people who were part of the Securitate who never got punished for their actions. You can just see them walking on the street. The Rohingya is a very interesting one. They have been indigenous to the Rakhine state for centuries before being driven out in 2016. They were butchered and murdered, raped and expelled with all evidence of being omitted from Burmese records. They now are spread all across Asia where they are met with great hostilities and are currently globe-hopping longing to return home. The Germans were never in the dark or unaware of the Nazi regime's intentions and plans. Nobody was fooled during the election, nobody was fooled during the war, nobody was in the dark about the harsh anti-Jewish policies. It was all very openly discussed. It's simply a victim's mentality meant to water down the fact that they were all indirectly complicit. The Romani genocide within the Holocaust. Anywhere from 1890 of Rome and Europe were annihilated, and when the Allied forces liberated the concentration camps, they left the Romani people imprisoned. After the war, no apology or reparations were extended to the Romani as it was to the Jews, and to this day they are heavily persecuted throughout Europe. More than you can imagine. Try to find old information regarding a current event. The removal of Trump from the ballot based on the 14th Amendment is happening now. There are already judicial precedents stating how the 14th's authority works. This happens a lot now. Definitions on dictionary websites are changing some definitions as well. Not all over the world, but Pakistani history completely erased the Bengal War and what Pakistan did to them. It just says that East Pakistan Bangladesh had famines, and due to interference from India, they incited the Bengalis to get independence and they became independent. Like, completely glossing over the war. Palestine. Before Zionism, even the indigenous Jews that lived there were called Palestinians. The idea of Zionism is you take away land from the Arabs and build upon it was a way of claiming it. This is what started all the fighting. It's not about religion. It's about Western colonization in the Middle East. Not a race but little known outside Alsace and Moselle, the story of them all grey new in spite of ourselves. These are the people who, after the German invasion during the Second World War, had to fight on the German side. Otherwise their families would be shot or sent to concentration camps. March 2020 January 2021. I am amazed and disappointed at the growing narrative of how things were better under Trump because something prices were lower and things were peaceful. It's as if half the population have gaslit themselves into forgetting that 2020 ever happened. The British colonial enterprise was as bad or worse than the Nazis or Stalin's Russia. It was an evil, exploitative, vampiric entity that killed millions and destroyed entire communities, industries and cultures purely based on racism, and also set the template for Hitler's expansionism. The greatest genocide in my opinion was when King Leopold II went into Congo and killed 15 million Congolese. I personally think it was more. Also, blacks were killed in the Holocaust too, but their bodies were never counted in the death toll because they were not human. AD, BCCE, BCE. Jesus isn't being removed from history at this point. I understand why they changed it, but the stuff they changed it to is nonsense. What's a common era? Christianity was the religion of one of the biggest European empires, at least it was somewhat relevant. How Germany actively tried to whitewash the Wehrmacht and Nazi atrocities for most of the Cold War, and how their politicians clamored for imprisoned Nazis to be released in the 50s. The whole myth of German atonement for World War II is definitely more recent than one would think. The atrocities committed under the British Empire. If you wonder why the right-wing press were all uppity about BLM in the UK, that's because BLM in the UK brought to light stuff the UK doesn't want you to know too much about. A lot about the civil rights movements, Tulsa and etc. Most of it is either being brushed over, that MLK Jr. said stop it and racism just magically went away. And topics like a lot of the negative stuff about the US is either being downplayed or outright forgotten. Black on black and Arab on black slavery should probably put Arab on Arab slavery too, as that one still happens. Like white people don't have clean hands, and I'm not saying we do, but we bought the slaves off black people and Arabs, but no one seems to talk about that. In World War II how France people in general were pretty okay and open to Nazi ideals. Under occupation shipping people to camps etc., but they pretty much rewrote the history glorifying the resistance force who were just a little group of individuals resisting Nazi occupation. Basically, all lifestyles and pagan stories in Germany, France, etc. basically all places affected by Romans before the people living there began writing. If I understand it correctly, only the names Woden and Donor are left from these times. Owning what you buy. You don't own your phone that you pay $1,000 for. You are leasing the right to use it. You don't own your music anymore, you subscribe for access to a database. Same for our movies, books, video games, and computer programs. North African Tatar-Mongolian slave trade and West African slave empires. Eastern Europe being royally fucked over by the West after EU. Chinese economic dominance and global trade until the 19th century, though that's more on top than erased. The labor history of most of the world. People have little idea that things people today take for granted or even scoff at were fought for with blood. Those who brag about working long hours or laugh at safety regulations spit on their graves. The horrors of communism and the Iron Curtain. People pretending that China and Russia are democratic countries. The Abadan theory, aka how Western greed for petroleum has destroyed the country of Iran. Switzerland stealing Jewish gold. Japan has been trying its hardest for so many years now to delete how violent Gorish they were Lamau. With the Hello Kitty wave being bigger than ever now, it's clearly working. They have been trying to shift their past. Don't blame them. 2016 Russian interference in US elections. It's like everyone forgot about it or don't care about the severity. It makes sense because 2020 was crazier, and that is what will always be talked about when the word election gets thrown out. Apart from buildings, roads, stuff being renamed or statues being torn down or moved somewhere else? Nothing. I get that things are offensive, but history is filled with messed up stuff, and pretending things didn't exist is not history. The Armenian genocide. Look it up. An utter blight in human history. Turkey refuses to acknowledge any part of it, and because of the US large air base at Incirlik, the US won't describe it as such too. For shame! The number of times various countries near Israel have attacked it. Everybody loves to talk about how many people Israel killed in those wars, but they don't want to acknowledge that Israel didn't tend to start most of those wars. In the West, people tend to ignore that Republic of China is technically a Chinese colonial government put in charge of Taiwan in 1945, and the US, for one reason or another, won't allow Taiwanese people to overthrow that. The good deeds of Hitler's Nazi regime. No one ever talks about the charity and aid the Nazis gave to other right-wing independence movements in Ukraine, Finland, and Palestine. Or their contributions to rocket science.